Recently, I read an alarming statistic. Up to 50% of people are reporting potential burnout in the workplace. That's an epidemic. And when asked what's the cause of their burnout, one of the most popular answers is having to deal with toxic people. You know what I mean? The people that just suck the life and the energy out of you. Today we're going to explore that, and we're going to ask the question, how do you deal with toxic people? In this video, we're going to explore, first of all, how do you know if someone is toxic? And then explore 4 proven ways that we can deal with toxic people. Stay tuned, because at the end, I want to offer you a free gift, which is how to have a difficult conversation with someone. Because at times, when it comes to toxic people, a difficult conversation needs to happen. And I want to provide you with a blueprint on how you can set up that conversation. When it comes to dealing with toxic people, the first thing is an interior exploration. It's important to ask what's happening in your particular relationship with that person. And I want to give you 4 questions that can really assess if indeed you are dealing with a toxic person. The first question is, does it seem that this person is draining my emotions? You know, one of the things that happens whenever we're in conversation with a toxic person is that we leave the conversation or the interaction and we feel a little bit drained. We feel less energy. It takes a lot of energy to remain in conversation with that person, especially if the toxicity is around negativity. Just think about what it feels like to be around a person who's always complaining about something. It just takes so much more energy to remain engaged. The second question to ask is, am I walking on eggshells? You know, when the toxic person tends to have much more of an explosive temperament, if you're dealing with someone who always seems to be angry, if you're dealing with someone that really surprises you with emotions that come at you really out of the blue, and that you find that you're always treading on eggshells, being careful about what you say and don't say because of fear of how the person reacts, then you are indeed dealing with a toxic person. The third question to ask is, am I ignoring my own voice? You know, one of the things that toxic people do to us is they close us down. They prevent us from really sounding our voice and saying what we really think. So be reflective. Am I losing my own voice? Am I failing to speak up when really I should? And then the final question to ask is, do I feel smaller or insignificant around this person? Very often a toxic personality is larger than life, and their impact is felt in the relationship or in the organization. And very often what we can find is ourselves becoming defensive and smaller around that person. So those are 4 really good reflection questions to ask when you're trying to explore if actually you're dealing with a toxic person. So now that we've explored those 4 questions, let's move on now to 4 practical ways of dealing with this person in your life. The first and probably the most important is this: setting appropriate boundaries. You see, when it comes to our relationships, we have a responsibility to signal to another person what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. To signal to another person when they have violated a boundary or gone too far. And so that's part of being self-respectful for yourself. You know, very often we can kind of get blurry around the boundaries that we want to set. But part of really feeling self-confident, part of self-respect, is this ability to realize that I deserve to be treated in a certain way. That when a person speaks to me in a certain way, that they've violated a boundary, and it's for me to set that boundary. So let me give you a practical example. Say if you're dealing with a toxic person who is very demanding, who speaks very forcefully, and perhaps maybe derogatory towards you. It's important for you to establish a healthy boundary. And so maybe what we need to say is, look, by all means, it's okay for you to point out anything that I've done wrong. It's okay for you to express your expectations. But it's not okay for you to do that in a demeaning way. It's not okay for you to do this in a way that's picking parts of my personality and not really focusing on the work. So establishing boundaries is incredibly important. And that may take some time. It's important for you to reflect upon that. What are the appropriate boundaries? What are your expectations? What way do you like to be treated? And what violates that? And once you have clarity around your boundaries, the next step, of course, is to speak up for those boundaries and to signal them. So part of the next move is to really express to the other person, this is a boundary and I do not want it to be violated. And if the person keeps violating that boundary, then we have another issue. But first of all, the important task is to express those boundaries, to know what those boundaries are, and to make sure that a person is aware of them and if they violate it. The second area is to speak assertively. Very often when it comes to communication, we find different areas of speech patterns. The first area is aggressive. This is where a person communicates to you in an aggressive way. And really what's important for the person with an aggressive communication pattern is they are more important than you. And through that aggression, they almost trample you down, and through their aggression, they express really where the balance of power is. Then there is a passive-aggressive speech pattern. And really what passive-aggressive is, it's the other side of aggression, but it's done in a passive way. And so what we'll find is that the person is not dealing directly with the person they find fault with, but rather they are making sarcastic comments to everyone else but that person. And so it's an aggressive form of communication, but it's passive. It's not directed at the person who it should be directed at. And then finally, there is an assertive communication pattern. And what an assertive communication pattern is the ability to speak up for your own needs in a powerful way that is respectful of the other person and demand the same from them in return. Really what it's doing is trying to balance the power and to make sure that you're both on an equal footing. And so therefore it's this ability to speak what your needs are and to make sure that those needs are respected and that the boundaries that we've just spoke about are also being maintained. Hopefully you're enjoying this video. And before we move on to the two other ways of dealing with a toxic person, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, to press the bell when you'll be notified of the videos as they come out. I produce a weekly video which explores different areas of emotional intelligence. And just like this video, the core of the material is to help you improve your relationships with other people at work and at home. The third area is to focus on solutions. Now, this is especially appropriate if the toxic person in your life is one who is a constant complainer. When you have to deal with someone who all they bring to the table is one complaint after the other. And so one of the ways to really change the balance in this conversation is to move it towards solutions. To say, okay, yes, this is not a perfect situation, but what are some ways that we might want to begin to address this? What are some changes that potentially we could make? You see, that's a shift in energy, and it's really challenging the toxic person to really change their shift in how they're viewing the situation. So the next time you have to deal with a person who is constantly complaining, respectfully say, okay, I think we've heard enough about what's wrong. Now can we move to a solution focus? How could we improve this situation? What are some things that we could do, that we could implement, that might move this from something negative to something that's more bearable or even something that's positive? And fourthly, there comes the decision to either distance or leave. You see, there are some toxic people in our lives that really are so polluting that at times what we have to create is a distance to them. Now, this kind of follows up from the first point I talked about boundaries. There are certain people who repeatedly violate our boundaries, and no matter how much we speak up, they continue to violate those boundaries. And in those cases, it's very important for us, for our own self-esteem, to really value ourselves and to create a distance or a barrier to that person. And if that's not possible, then we also have to bring up the situation that it might be better in this situation to leave the job, to leave the relationship. Because if it continues, it's going to result in greater mental health problems for you. So the final point is, if the behavior is long-term, if the toxic person is not willing to change, create a barrier or think deeply about leaving the situation or the relationship. Toxic people are part of our lives. Sometimes they're in relationship with one, sometimes they're in the workplace. And what's really important is that we find practical ways of dealing with them. Now, one of the things that's been mentioned in all 4 points that I made today is the need for a conversation. And at times that can be a difficult conversation. And sometimes we're uncomfortable with that conversation. Today I want to offer you a free gift. And it's a blueprint about how to go about constructing and having a difficult conversation. You'll find a link with the blueprint below, which will send you to a PDF, which will outline everything you need to do to have one of those difficult conversations. And if you've enjoyed this video, I invite you to watch the next video, which is how to deal with an angry boss.